Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a world of windswept steppes, smoky fires, and sharpened steel. A time when history smelled like saddle leather, roasted lamb, and wet earth. You're lying beneath the stars, wrapped in a scratchy wool cloak, surrounded by a family that isn't really yours, because you've been adopted into a tribe on the fringe of the known world. Horses outnumber people, and the borderlands are so thinly stretched between empires. It's like someone tried to patch a map with goat skin and prayer. You're in Söğüt, or near it. Technically, it's less a city and more a scattered blur of tents, wooden huts, and the occasional stone house, stubborn enough to still be standing. Somewhere to your west, the bones of Byzantium are creaking. To your east, the fractured Seljuk Sultanate pretends it still matters. And you? You're with a bunch of horsemen who barely show up on maps yet. People who call themselves the Kayı, a sub-tribe of the larger Oghuz Turks. It's the late 1200s. And you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from a warm bed in Seoul or São Paulo, or a couch in Cairo, post your local time in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world you're nodding off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with a crackle, firewood snapping in the wind. You've been walking all day. Well, riding mostly, but there's always walking. At some point when the mule gives out, or the creek's too deep. Söğüt isn't much of a destination, but it's home base. Campfires glow like scattered constellations on the ground. The smell of lentils, flatbread, and something suspiciously goat-like drifts through the canvas village. Someone's playing a reed flute. Somewhere else, someone's sharpening a blade. You're not sure which sound is more comforting. The Kayı tribe moves like breath, flexible, temporary. Their warriors, Gazis they call them, mix religion and raiding in a blur of arrows. And Allah. These guys aren't your traditional empire builders yet. They're more like frontier wolves with good cheekbones and a strong sense of destiny. Their leader? A man named Ertuğrul. But he's old now, worn, bent, still respected, but fading like a campfire at dawn. His son Osman, though, that one's got sparks. Osman's still young, maybe early 20s, maybe late 20s. Records are fuzzy, and historians still argue whether he was born in 1258 or a bit earlier. Doesn't matter much to you, because you've seen him ride, and fight, and pray, and smile like he knows something's coming. Something big. He wears chainmail like it's a second skin, and quotes poetry like a man trying to woo the stars. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. But the world you're in, it's brittle. The Seljuk Empire, the Islamic superpower that once ruled this land, is crumbling faster than a stale baklava. Mongols press from the east. Christian crusaders glare from the west. And the Byzantines, well, they're like a drunken uncle at the family table. Technically in charge. Practically irrelevant. And it's in this exact soup of uncertainty, tension, and opportunity that Osman's tribe floats, like a piece of bread on hot broth. No one expects much of them. They're just one of dozens of Gazi bands, eking out a life raiding Byzantine forts and stealing sheep from neighbors with slightly different accents. You build your identity out here the way you build a saddle, slowly, with stitches and scars. Most nights, you sleep on a sheepskin, wrapped in 2 layers of wool, your knife tucked under your chest for warmth and security. The stars are shockingly bright. No city haze to blur them. The Milky Way is a smeared road above you, like the path you keep chasing on the ground. Sometimes you dream of cities, and other times of fire. You remember one evening when Osman gathered the elders. You weren't supposed to be listening, but you were cleaning a pot nearby. Quietly, they sat on carpets, passing a bowl of yogurt and pomegranate seeds, the kind of treat you only get when something big is being said. Osman leaned forward, eyes fierce, voice soft. The Byzantines grow weak, he said, but their cities still glimmer. Their walls still hold. It's not enough to be a raider. We must become something larger. Someone snorted. Probably Uncle Dundar, the classic naysayer. And who will feed the horses while you dream of palaces? Osman just smiled. We'll build something they'll never see coming. Back then, that sounded like a bedtime story. But now, you're starting to wonder if it was prophecy. Life in Söğüt isn't all sword play and speeches, though. There are markets too. Modest ones, where women haggle over turmeric and children chase chickens they'll later regret knowing. Personally, the tribe trades with everyone. Christians, Greeks, Armenians, even Mongol patrols when it suits them. Loyalty out here isn't defined by flags. It's defined by what your neighbor does when your tent catches fire. You learn that Osman's mother might have been Christian. Some say Greek, others say Byzantine. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a story added later to make him seem more unifying. Either way, it explains why he speaks in both Quranic parables and weirdly well-pronounced Greek. There is a quirky little shrine at the edge of the village, half Sufi mysticism, half old Anatolian cult hangout. It smells like rosewater and ancient dust. People go there when they want answers, or miracles, or a nap. You went once, saw Osman praying there. Not loudly, just lips moving like wind over reeds. Later you hear the tale. One night, Osman fell asleep at the house of a respected holy man, Sheikh Edebali. During the night, he had a dream. In it, a moon rose from the sheikh's chest and entered Osman's own. Then a tree grew from him, huge, shadowing mountains, rivers, 4 great branches symbolizing future lands. The tree's leaves covered the world. Below it, cities bloomed like spring. Osman woke up, eyes wide. The next morning, he asked to marry the sheikh's daughter. Boom. Dynasty launched. Now, whether that dream was divine revelation or a brilliantly timed PR campaign is, well, you know the drill. Historians still argue. You ride patrols sometimes. Long, dusty loops near Byzantine forts. Not to conquer, yet, but to remind the neighbors that the Kayı are here, and they're not playing checkers. The Byzantines mostly ignore you, still thinking of the Ottomans as a backwater band with shiny swords and no staying power. That won't age well. Your commander tells you to watch the river crossings. The Byzantine soldiers have better armor, better fortresses, but they don't ride like you. And they definitely don't pray between skirmishes. Every so often, there's a clash, not a full war, more like a sharp misunderstanding with swords. You lose a man, they lose two. Someone writes a poem about it, and so it goes, one arrow at a time, one tent at a time, one whispered legend at a time. You're not an empire yet, not even close, but something's growing in Söğüt. You feel it in the way Osman rides, the way the tribe whispers his name, a little differently now, like it's already carved into something bigger than a wooden pole. The land is wide, the empires are tired, and the stars, oddly, feel closer than ever. One night, Osman returns from a raid with spoils and songs. He doesn't look tired, he looks ready. Fires are lit, bread is broken, the sheep not so lucky. And in the flickering warmth, someone begins to chant a line you haven't heard before. One day, the sons of Osman will rule the world. You laugh, quietly. Then you look at Osman, and you stop laughing. Something's rising, and it smells like smoke. By the time Osman starts dreaming of empires, the world around you is already quietly collapsing. Not with a bang, no, that would have been easier. What you're witnessing is slower, like a silk thread fraying until it suddenly snaps. The Byzantines, once the mighty Eastern Romans, are bleeding border towns like a sickly aristocrat losing cufflinks. The Seljuks, the Turkish overlords who once roared across Anatolia, are now mostly a memory wearing a rusted crown. And the Mongols, well, they're still galloping across the horizon. But for now, they've parked themselves just far enough east to be a problem for someone else. You, meanwhile, are living inside the smoke and dust of the soft implosion. Söğüt still smells like horses and lentil stew. But there's a growing sense that something else is crackling in the campfires. Something sharper than just survival. Osman begins to change. It starts small. He fasts more, prays longer. He asks more questions, not just about raids or supplies or border disputes, but about law, about justice, about dreams. Not the sleepy kind, the other kind. And then one night, there's a story. A story you'll hear 100 times, in 100 versions. It goes like this. Osman visits Sheikh Edebali again. This time, not for advice, not for marriage, just rest. Edebali is an old, wise Sufi, a scholar, mystic, and spiritual compass for half the tribe. His house is simple, woven rugs, low tables, oil lamps, and enough books to make you nervous. Osman eats dinner, listens to a few verses from the Quran, and then curls up to sleep. In the middle of the night, Osman dreams. A moon rises from the chest of Edebali, arcs into Osman's own, and then from Osman's body grows a tree, massive, world-consuming. Its branches stretch over continents. Beneath them flow rivers, the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Danube. Cities bloom in the tree's shade, domed, walled, glorious. Their minarets shimmer like stars. The tree's roots pierce deep into the earth. Its leaves whisper in languages Osman doesn't recognize. He wakes up sweating. He doesn't wait till breakfast. He marches to Edebali and, half bowing, blurts out a request to marry the Sheikh's daughter, Malhun Hatun. Now, was this dream literal? Divine? A clever tale, patched together later to legitimize Osman's rule. Historians still argue whether it was ever recorded at the time, or only whispered into chronicles after Osman's beard was safely carved into coins. What matters more, honestly, is that Osman believes it. You see it in the way he speaks now, not just as a leader of men, but of ideas. The Gazi raids continue. Byzantine outposts fall. Tribute flows in. But Osman begins drawing maps on the dirt, asking questions like, what does it mean to rule? Who gets to decide justice? Can an empire rise from tents? His friends still think in terms of loot. Osman is thinking in terms of legacy. You spend days now riding with scouts, measuring the land not just for attack, but for settlement. Osman doesn't want to just burn towns. He wants to absorb them. The dream wasn't about fire. It was about roots. The first big test comes at Karakahisar, a small Byzantine fortress perched on a crag above the road. Nothing grand. A garrison, a chapel, a market square, and walls so tired they look like they're leaning for support. Osman doesn't storm it. He starves it. It takes weeks. Long, hungry weeks. But when it finally falls, Osman doesn't torch the chapel. He converts it into a mosque. He lets the market continue. He appoints a qadi, a judge, to oversee justice under Islamic law. Not by the sword, but by decree. That may not sound revolutionary, but it is. Because now Osman isn't just raiding, he's ruling. He even mints his own coins. A move so bold, you almost choke on your yogurt soup when you hear about it. Coins mean sovereignty. Coins mean permanence. Coins mean, hey Byzantines, we're not going anywhere. And here's your quirky tidbit. The earliest Ottoman coins didn't even carry Osman's full name. They were humble, almost bashful, marked with the basic phrase, struck by Osman, son of Ertuğrul, like a signature on a lease for a kingdom he hasn't finished building yet. You ride past Karakahisar a few weeks later. The locals are already adapting. Turkish and Greek kids play in the dust. Markets hum. Soldiers bow to imams and trade gossip with leftover Christian merchants. You spot a caravan arriving from Konya, carrying spices, textiles, and news. One of the traders leans in and whispers to you. Did you hear? They're calling him Bey now. Not just Osman. Osman Bey. Titles are funny like that. They start in whispers and end in marble. But the dreaming doesn't stop there. Osman starts speaking about beyliks, states, territories, and foundations. He studies how the Seljuks once ruled. What worked? What didn't? He sends envoys to scholars, to jurists, even to rival tribes. He's shaping something, and you can feel it pressing in the air like a summer storm. Of course, not everyone likes this. Within his own tribe, jealousy simmers. His uncle, Dündar, becomes a particular thorn. Dündar's more traditional, a respected elder who thinks Osman's dreams are a bit much. He's going to get us all killed, Dündar mutters one night by the fire. Empires, cities, bah. We're nomads. We ride. We raid. That's enough. Eventually, it comes to a head, depending on which version you believe. Dündar either openly rebels or simply refuses orders during a critical siege. Osman, seeing the threat not just to his power, but to his vision, makes a cold, brutal choice. He executes his own uncle. Yeah, you heard that right. Dreams have costs, and still, Osman dreams. He gathers artisans, masons, scholars. He orders the construction of mosques, public fountains, even a madrasa, infrastructure, in a land where infrastructure used to mean flat road and not too many wolves. One night, you find him staring at a parchment. It's not a map, it's a genealogy. His family line, traced back to Oghuz Khan, to the semi-mythical Turkish past. Osman's not just building forward, he's building backward, anchoring his future in legends that make people believe they're born for something greater. Do you believe in fate? He asks you. You hesitate. I believe in hard work. He smiles. Good. Because fate is lazy without it. You won't forget that line. There's a phrase that starts getting passed around. First as a joke, then as a proverb. Where Osman sleeps, cities rise. And it's true. Wherever he settles, he builds. He governs. He blesses marriages, arbitrates disputes, and carves order from the chaos that once defined the frontier. That, more than any battlefield, is the foundation of empire. It's easy to forget, lying under stars, that you're watching something historical. It still smells like sheep, still tastes like salted yogurt. But when you wake to the sound of prayers echoing from a newly built minaret, you start to feel it. The dream is solidifying. And you? You're riding the first breath of something enormous. You don't build an empire on dreams alone. Sooner or later, you need two things: a good sword and a smart marriage. Preferably not at the same time. Though, with Osman, those two often blur. By now, Osman is no longer just that ambitious young Gazi, with a twinkle in his eye and a dream tree sprouting from his chest. He's becoming something heavier, more complex. People start referring to his rule as the Beylik, and while that word still feels more tent flap than throne room, the shift is real. He's already proven himself in battle. He's already drawn blood and maps. But if his vision is to last beyond his own arrow-stuffed tunic, he needs stability, allies, legitimacy. So he does what leaders have done for centuries when looking to cement power. He gets married. And depending on which historian you consult, he gets married twice, or once, or maybe more. The records are foggy, and historians still argue whether Malhun Hatun or Rabia Bala Hatun was his first, or whether they're the same woman with a rebranded Wikipedia page. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're there the day Osman marries Sheikh Edebali's daughter. The union is as much political as personal, a spiritual alliance more than a state wedding. The Sheikh is a man of immense religious influence, And by joining his family, Osman isn't just gaining a wife, he's anchoring his rule in divine favor. To marry a Sufi scholar's daughter is to wrap your sword in silk and scripture. At the same time, the ceremony is modest, woven with Quranic verses, laughter, and the unsettling volume of sheep bleating in the background. Osman looks calm, determined, like a man who sees the whole chessboard but knows exactly when to move a pawn. And here's the quirky part. One version of the story claims that Edebali originally refused the marriage request. Osman, heartbroken, returned to his tent, but spent the night praying so earnestly, so devotedly, that Edebali had a change of heart, not because Osman begged, but because he didn't. That, they say, is when Osman earned both a bride and a prophecy. But let's not forget, this is still the 13th century. Marriage may smooth the political road, but swords still do the paving. Osman doesn't stop raiding. In fact, he doubles down. With Edebali's blessing, and now the added support of religious warriors, Ghazis, who see him as more than just a tribal leader. He launches a series of attacks against Byzantine strongholds that had long loomed over their borderlands, like poorly aged leftovers from the Roman Empire. You ride with him toward Yenişehir. The campaign is brutal, but not chaotic. Osman is methodical, almost unnervingly patient. He's learned that battles don't win themselves, but neither do they need to be rushed. Like all great commanders, he fights in layers, first disrupting supply lines, then softening defenses with psychological warfare, then offering clemency just sharp enough to sound generous, while still scaring the sandals off anyone nearby. Yenişehir doesn't fall in a blaze of glory. It falls in a long, slow exhale. And once again, Osman doesn't raise it. He fortifies it, establishes a garrison, appoints governors, starts a local market, and by the time you walk through its gates with a canteen of sour yogurt in one hand and a new pair of Byzantine boots in the other, the town's already halfway Ottoman. Osman's soldiers joke about being part-time warriors, part-time mayors. And honestly, they're not wrong. But not all alliances come with veils and dowries. Some come on horseback, with grudges and conditions. Osman starts marrying off his sons, not all at once, and not necessarily happily, to the daughters of neighboring tribal leaders. Each match seals a truce, a trade route, or a military pact. It's diplomacy by genealogy, and it works more often than it doesn't. One especially impactful alliance comes with the Jeremianids, a rival Turkish principality with territory, soldiers, and just enough ambition to be dangerous. A Jeremianid bride joins Osman's family, and with her comes a substantial dowry, land. You don't have to swing a sword if your in-laws hand you the keys to a castle. It's around this time that Osman begins to step back slightly from the front lines, not out of fear or age, though his joints now creak like old saddle leather, but because leadership, he realizes, means thinking in decades, not days. You watch him delegate more. He lets his son, Orhan, take the lead on raids. He sends trusted companions to manage towns. He even, grudgingly, lets bureaucrats start writing things down. A quill, after all, can conquer what a sword cannot. Still, Violence hovers. Osman can't afford to fully trade steel for scrolls. One winter, word arrives that a coalition of Christian lords and rival beys are planning a joint offensive. Apparently, Osman's steady string of conquests has made a few too many neighbors nervous. There's talk of a grand ambush, of crushing the Ottomans before they can grow legs. Osman doesn't blink. He gathers his men, including some of the very tribes he married into, and sets out to intercept them. The battle takes place near Domanic, on a slope slick with ice and tension. You're on the hill with the archers, breath frosting before your lips, fingers twitching on bowstrings. Osman rides out front, wrapped in a fur cloak, his sword unsheathed but lowered. And then he lifts it. That sword, simple, curved, gleaming with centuries of symbolic baggage, rises like a banner. And when it falls, so do the enemy ranks. It's not a rout, it's a warning. The Ottomans are not a footnote, they are a force. That sword, by the way, gets passed down. It becomes the sword of Osman, used in the ceremonial girding of every future sultan, worn across the body during coronation, like a ghost at your hip. A reminder that no one rules unless Osman's blade says so. Even centuries later, in palaces built of marble and gold, that original sword, humble, unadorned, unapologetically sharp, will still touch every sultan's waist before they can wear the crown. Talk about legacy hardware. And the marriage bed, it doesn't just produce alliances, it produces heirs. Osman's sons begin to rise in rank. Orhan, in particular, shows promise. Level-headed, clever, steady in battle. He's not his father's echo. He's something else entirely. Less of a dreamer, maybe. More of a builder. The family begins to form the nucleus of a dynasty. Not just warriors with blood on their hands, but rulers with ink on their fingers. You watch the transition in real time. One generation of Gazis passes the torch to another. Campfires become city centers. Tent walls are replaced with masonry. The tribe becomes a polity. The polity begins to look a lot like a state. And you? You're still there, watching, listening, learning, helping fortify walls that used to be made of canvas, trying not to trip over the goats that still, somehow, haven't gotten the memo that this is now the headquarters of a rising power. One night, Osman gathers his inner circle. You're invited, mostly because you're good at not talking when secrets are spoken. He draws a rough map in the dirt. We have the West, he says, pointing toward Byzantine land. But the sea waits. The cities wait. Bursa waits. They all nod. You do too. Then he draws a line that curves up toward the Dardanelles, toward Gallipoli, toward Europe. No one says anything. Not yet. But the fire flickers in Osman's eyes, and you know what it means. The marriage was never just about family. The sword was never just for defense. Osman isn't building an empire. He's building the empire, and it's only just begun. You wake to the sound of hooves, not the thundering war stampede kind, more like the slow, calculated rhythm of men returning from a raid with saddlebags full of loot and just enough religious righteousness to justify the blood still drying on their tunics. Another fortress has fallen. Another Byzantine border town has swapped its flag, its priest, and, somewhat awkwardly, its tax collector. And Osman? Osman Bey sits beneath a tent that smells of leather, smoke, and scrolls, nodding calmly as his men brag, joke, and argue over how many sheep they can claim without invoking divine wrath. It's a good day to be a Gazi, but what exactly is a Gazi? The answer depends on who you ask, and when you ask them. By now, the Ottomans are a rising force, small but mighty, with Osman's Beylik stretching its fingers deeper into the soft underbelly of the Byzantine Empire. His warriors call themselves Ghazis, holy warriors, sword wielders of Islam, defenders of the faith on the bleeding edges of civilization. Think of them as knight-errants, wrapped in wool and ambition. And sure, many of them are devout. They ride into battle, reciting Quranic verses. They pray between skirmishes. They speak of paradise as if it's just over the next ridge. But others? Well, they're in it for the spoils. See, the frontier is messy. No clean lines, no permanent addresses. Out here, identity is as fluid as the river that sometimes marks the border, until it floods and decides to wander. Ghazis aren't a formal army. Not yet. They're a confederation, a suggestion, a brand. If we're being cynical. They come from everywhere. Turkish nomads, ex-Seljuks, Sufi wanderers, converts, runaways, even some Slavs and Greeks who found the sword of Osman more dependable than their old lords. Some joined for faith, others for food. A few just want a horse and a chance to rewrite their story. And Osman, he knows this. He doesn't lecture them. He uses them out here to build something real. You need flexibility. You need to let people believe what they need to believe, so long as they're riding in the same direction. So Osman wraps conquest in faith. He frames raids as righteous. He allows poets and imams to talk about destiny and divinely appointed leadership. And the best part, it works. Your latest loot haul might include stolen silks and 2 terrified chickens, but the camp imam will still bless the expedition. And then someone quotes a verse about holy struggle, and suddenly the chickens feel like religious icons. There's one particular skirmish that sparks the debate wide open. It starts with a village, modest, defenseless, orthodox. Not even a fortress, really. Just stone houses, a church with peeling frescoes, and an old man who swears he once saw Emperor Michael Date in person. Osman's men surround it. There's no battle, just a few shouted orders and a lot of terrified glances. The people surrender. Some join, some leave. And Osman, standing in the middle of the town square, announces that the village will now operate under his protection as long as they pay the jizya, the tax for non-Muslims under Islamic rule. It's not new. The tax is an ancient policy used by caliphates for centuries. But it raises a question. Is Osman liberating these Christians from a decaying Byzantine hand? Or is he just finding new ways to legitimize plunder? One of his lieutenants, a bearded Gazi named Turgut, who wears 2 swords and 0 subtlety, laughs over the fire that night and says, "I don't care what flag they fly, as long as they still have goats." You chuckle, but you also wonder, and you're not alone. Historians still argue whether the early Ottomans were truly motivated by Islamic zeal, or whether that identity was applied retroactively, polished like a gem for the sake of later legitimacy. Some scholars point to the early Ottoman chronicles, written generations after Osman's death, and say propaganda, myth-making, convenient retellings of men who were mostly bandits in prayer hats. Others push back. No, the Gazi ethos was real. Faith and frontier go hand in hand. Just because someone enjoys a gold-plated helmet doesn't mean they don't believe in God. Honestly, riding with these men, it's hard to separate the two. Faith and survival blur together. Religion is both a compass and a sword hilt. You pray before battle. You thank Allah after. You also keep a very close eye on your coin pouch. There's a story that floats through camp, told in low voices, often after wineskins have been passed around a few times, too many. They say Osman once approached a Christian fortress, one he'd raided before, but never captured, and sent a messenger inside. The message wasn't a demand for surrender. It was a request for marriage. Yep, marriage. Turns out, the daughter of the local governor was famous for her beauty and wisdom. Osman, ever the multitasker, figured he could kill 2 Byzantine birds with 1 romantic stone. According to legend, the governor agreed. Kind of. He invited Osman to dinner under the pretense of accepting the proposal. Osman, suspicious, sent someone else in his place. That someone else never returned. Osman, in a moment of what scholars might call, "Oh no you didn't," laid siege to the fortress, captured it in a week, and personally ordered the governor's beard to be shaved in public. A deep, humiliating burn in those days. Did it happen? Probably not exactly like that. But the point? Osman was cunning. He used marriage, faith, and military pressure interchangeably. Whatever tool got the job done. Back in camp, the debates continue. Some Ghazis genuinely recite scripture between sword strokes. Others carve dice out of sheep bones and gamble away their loot in the same tent where they store Qurans. It's confusing, but Osman never demands perfection. He demands loyalty, and in return, he offers something intoxicating, the chance to matter, to be part of something bigger than just another raid. A promise that your name will echo through valleys long after your bones are dust. The word Ottoman starts to mean more than just Osman's people. It becomes a brand of destiny, a whispered idea, a movement. And you're swept into it. One night, a caravan arrives from the east. Scribes, scholars, poets. One of them, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, begins compiling a genealogy of Osman's lineage. Another starts writing verses, praising his campaigns as holy struggles ordained by Allah. It feels coordinated, almost curated. And here's your quirky detail. The earliest Ottoman chronicles don't even mention some of Osman's biggest early victories. It's as if the facts were less important than the image. Like the past itself was just another horse to saddle and ride. Still, none of this matters to the villagers of Kapruhisar, who are about to learn Osman's name the hard way. The town lies on a trade route. Nothing grand, but valuable enough. And it's currently guarded by a small Byzantine force. Arrogant, underpaid, and blissfully unaware that the Gazis are coming, Osman surrounds the place. He offers terms: surrender, pay the tax, accept protection. They refuse. Big mistake. The Ottomans storm the walls. It's not a massacre, but it's loud, hot, and personal. The Gazis shout prayers as they climb. The defenders shout curses. You mostly try not to die. When it's over, Osman orders the church left standing, the gates repaired, and the marketplace reopened by week's end. He leaves a copy of the Quran in the governor's house and posts a note outside. Justice lives here now. Whether or not that's true depends on your side of the gate. That night, around the fire, you hear Osman say something strange. The sword brings land, he murmurs, but only justice brings hearts. He's tired, older now. His beard has gone from black to steel, but his eyes still burning. And whether he's a prophet, a politician, or just a very persuasive pirate, you know one thing for certain: the world is starting to bend around him. You wake to the scent of boiling grapes, fermented, sticky, sweet, wafting through a field of tents, pitched just beyond the trembling shadow of Bursa, the glittering city that, until now, has resisted the pull of Osman's rising moon. But this morning the mood is different. Men move with purpose. Horses are groomed, like they're headed for portraits. The flag of Osman's lineage, a simple crescent, still humble, flutters in the pre-dawn breeze, like it already belongs on those stone walls. And Osman Bey, he's quiet, watching, waiting. You stretch your arms and squint up toward the city, Bursa. The Byzantine jewel nestled into the foothills of Mount Uludağ, sacred thermal springs steaming gently behind her walls. Minarets and church towers tangled together like a city not yet sure what it wants to be. She's not just beautiful, she's strategic, economically powerful. The silk trade hums through her veins. Her bazaars glitter with spices, brocades, and, yes, the occasional fig. Taking Bursa means more than land. It means legitimacy, and she's about to fall, though not with a bang, but a sigh. The campaign against Bursa doesn't begin with a siege. It begins with a noose made of time. Osman and his sons know they can't storm the walls outright. The city is well defended, with Byzantine garrisons and thick fortifications. So instead, they do something far worse to a merchant city. They strangle it. First, Osman establishes control of the rural villages, especially those guarding the approaches and water routes. Then the trade roads. Then the mountain passes. One by one, the arteries that feed Bursa's golden heart are pinched closed. Caravans vanish. Letters go undelivered. Byzantine relief forces are intercepted, scattered, or simply bribed into desertion. Bursa isn't conquered. She's cornered, like a cat in a silk shop. Inside the city, people begin hoarding. Prices rise. Bread gets scarce. Pilgrims stop arriving. Panic creeps in. You hear whispers that the Byzantine emperor himself considered reinforcing Bursa. But Constantinople is dealing with its own headaches, including a civil war so convoluted, even the scribes need a spreadsheet. So Bursa is left to wither. You, meanwhile, are camped beneath Mount Uludağ, watching the Gazis work their magic. Some bring bards, who compose ballads in Turkish and Arabic, declaring Bursa, the apple of Islam. Others preach in the hills, painting Osman's war as a holy inevitability. A few, particularly cheeky ones, toss fig leaves over the wall with little notes that read, "Better ripe than rotten." It's psychological warfare with a floral twist. Inside the walls, the Byzantine commander, Evrenos, if the stories are true, is starting to crack. Some say he opens peace talks. Others claim he's just buying time. Regardless, things come to a head in 1326. Though Osman, the founder of this whole saga, does not live to see the final moment. Let's pause here for your mainstream fact. Osman Bey, the father of the Ottoman state, dies just before Bursa falls, in either 1323 or 1326. Accounts vary. But everyone agrees that his final wish was for Bursa to be taken and used as the seat of his beylik. He never steps foot inside it. Instead, the task falls to his son, Orhan, who assumes command not just of the siege, but of the growing Ottoman identity itself. Where Osman dreamed, Orhan builds. Where Osman inspired, Orhan organizes. And where Osman wielded poetry and plunder, Orhan wields currency, law, and walls. But back to the siege. After nearly a decade of pressure, Bursa finally capitulates, but not in flames. The city elders open the gates. No massacre, no pillage, just quiet surrender and carefully negotiated terms. In return, Orhan offers them a curious new order: the protection of Islam, autonomy for Christians, and the promise of revived trade. Many stay, many thrive. And here's your quirky detail. Orhan is said to have walked barefoot into Bursa, weeping with joy, before ordering that the church bells continue to ring. A deliberate gesture, signaling that non-Muslims would be protected under Ottoman rule. His first act isn't to build a palace, it's to build a mosque, yes, but also a hospice, a market, and a public bath. In short, the infrastructure of trust. Now here's the historical debate. Was Bursa's fall a turning point of ideology or just a stroke of opportunity? Some historians argue that Bursa marks the true transformation of the Ottoman state, from raiding band to principled polity. They point to the long-term planning, the peaceful transition, and the bureaucratic reforms that followed. Others caution against the romanticism. They note that the Ottomans were still a warrior band at heart, and that Bursa's fall had more to do with Byzantine dysfunction than Ottoman brilliance. Still, it's hard to argue with the outcome. Bursa becomes the first real capital of the Ottoman state. Its bazaars buzz again, but now under crescent flags. Silk weaving becomes a symbol of Ottoman refinement. Scholars and mystics arrive from the east. The first coins, stamped with the Ottoman name, are minted here, and slowly, Turkish replaces Greek in the alleys. The prayers, the laughter. You walk its streets weeks after the surrender, amazed. There are old women praying in Armenian. There are Gazis buying figs next to Christian basket weavers. There are schools being built, gardens planted, and there, on a hill above the city, stands the tomb of Osman Bey, or rather, the spot where he was first buried in a simple wooden coffin, per his dying wish, facing Mecca, looking out over the city he never entered, but always believed in. Eventually, Orhan will build a proper turbe, a mausoleum, over his father's bones. But for now, a red cloth flaps gently over the grave, tied by some unknown soldier who whispered a prayer and thanked the man who turned his sword into a future. So yes, Bursa fell, but not like a fortress cracked by cannon. She fell like a fig, soft, ripe, heavy with waiting, plucked at the precise moment of readiness. And from her seeds, an empire begins to bloom. You're standing in a marketplace in Bursa, sometime after its soft, fig-like surrender. The air smells of saffron, sheep's cheese, and ambition. The city, now fully under Ottoman control, hums with new energy. The sound of hammering doesn't just come from blacksmiths anymore. It's echoing from the new Ottoman mint, where metal is being transformed into magic. No, not gold. Legitimacy. Because right now, in this tender, early chapter of the Ottoman story, Orhan Bey isn't just interested in conquering cities. He wants to standardize them, to transform a patchwork of villages, raiders, converts, and monks into a state, and he knows exactly where to begin. Not with soldiers, not with walls, but with coins. You're handed one of the first, a shimmering silver piece, the akçe, light and round, and stamped not with a king's face, but with the words, struck in the name of Orhan, son of Osman. It's beautiful in a modest way. No lavish portraits, no grinning sultans, just script. Language itself is the crown here. And more importantly, there's no mention of the Caliph in Baghdad or the Byzantine emperor. It's a declaration of independence you can jingle in your pocket. The akçe is born, and with it, so is the Ottoman state economy. Let's pause here For your mainstream fact, Orhan Bey was the first Ottoman ruler to issue coins in his own name, a powerful symbol of sovereignty. Prior to this, the beylik had operated within the coin systems of others, mostly Byzantines or Seljuks. But now, the Ottomans had a currency to call their own, and that changed everything. The akçe isn't just a coin, it's a system, because if you're going to tax farmers, fund armies, bribe warlords, pay dervishes, or commission mosques, you need a stable measure of value. One people trust, one that stays put in their purse without turning to dust. Here's the thing though, Orhan's not just minting coins for fun. He's centralizing power, inch by inch. The mint in Bursa doesn't just produce akçes. It funnels silver into the hands of bureaucrats, scribes, treasurers, and yes, even spies. New record keepers emerge. Tax logs start appearing in Arabic script. Market weights are standardized. Trade contracts are written down and notarized. It's not sexy, but it's powerful. You realize that while his father, Osman, dreamed of crescents and conquests, Orhan dreams of ledgers. But wait, Orhan isn't ruling from a desk. He's expanding fast. During this period, Ottoman control spreads beyond Bursa, like water rolling down silk. You march westward under Orhan's banner, securing cities like Iznik, Nicaea, and Izmit, Nicomedia, former Byzantine powerhouses, now limping under weak defense. And how are these new places pacified? Sure, there's the odd skirmish, but more often than not, coins and contracts. Merchants are promised protection under Ottoman law. Christian guilds are allowed to keep their customs, provided they pay their taxes. Landowners receive formal deeds, now written with Ottoman seals. Everyone suddenly finds it profitable to stay put. Here's your quirky detail. The Ottomans even set up an early money-checking station in Bursa's bazaar, where suspicious coins, say bent Byzantine ones, could be weighed and either validated or swapped for akçes at a small discount. Yes, the early Ottomans had a currency exchange booth, and the people loved it. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. The Byzantines are in chaos again. Civil wars back in Constantinople mean the emperor is too distracted to defend his shrinking borderlands. Greek lords in Anatolia begin switching sides, not out of loyalty, but because Orhan pays his soldiers on time and lets you worship whomever you want, as long as you don't skip tax day. The coins do what the swords cannot. You can see it in the eyes of market women counting change, in Greek monks muttering thanks for peace, in the steady stream of Persian scholars, Arabic clerics, and Jewish doctors trickling into Ottoman cities with their savings and their books. The Ottoman state is becoming an idea, not just a place. But here comes the historical debate. Was the early Ottoman economy truly revolutionary, or simply well-organized pragmatism? Some historians argue that Orhan's monetary reforms were visionary, that by issuing coins, regulating markets, and respecting local economies, he built the scaffolding of a new Islamic empire with minimal bloodshed. Others argue that the system wasn't radically different from previous Islamic polities. such as the Seljuks or even the Abbasids. Orhan, they say, just copied the homework and didn't forget to sign his name this time. Still, even if it's not revolutionary, it's undeniably effective. Within a generation, the Ottomans go from obscure frontier warband to one of the most reliable employers in the Eastern Mediterranean. You return to Bursa's mint weeks later and watch new akçis pour from the presses. A young boy stamps each with a swift, rhythmic motion. The sound is hypnotic. Ping, ping, ping. It's the sound of an empire inventing itself. By now, the soldiers have money in their belts. The guilds have laws protecting their trades. The scribes have ink. And the Ottoman dream, once no more than a crescent on a raider's shield, now clinks in the pockets of merchants, beggars, and mayors alike. Orhan doesn't need everyone to love him. He just needs them to use his coin. You hear it before you see it. A low groan from the Dardanelles, the wind pushing salty mist into your face. Somewhere out there, the straits tremble. A continent away, Europe lies snug behind its watery curtain, sure of its safety, arrogant in its assumptions. But tonight, the moon is sharp, the oars are quiet, and the Ottomans are about to do something no one expects. They're crossing, and you're in the boat. It's 1354, and everything seems to be falling apart for everyone else. The Byzantines are exhausted from their latest civil war. Yes, another one. And the Black Death has made a messy exit across Europe, leaving behind empty farms, broken cities, and more than a few open thrones. The Serbian Empire is peaking and splintering all at once. The Bulgarians are brooding. Venice is watching nervously from across the Adriatic. Everyone smells weakness. Everyone except the Ottomans. They smell opportunity, and it reeks of whetstone and crumbling walls. Here's the mainstream fact. In 1354, an earthquake devastated the fortress town of Gallipoli, reducing its walls to rubble. The Byzantine defenders fled in terror. That same year, the Ottomans under Suleiman Pasha, son of Orhan, occupied the town. This marked the first permanent Ottoman foothold in Europe. They didn't smash down the gates with war elephants or siege engines. They just walked in. No drama, just timing. That's the Ottoman way. You and a handful of Gazis slip into the broken town as dawn paints the horizon. Wild dogs sniff around old icons. The church bells are silent. The wooden doors are cracked, but still swinging. Gallipoli is empty, or at least willingly quiet. A few Christian families peek through shutters. You don't threaten them. You post guards. You unroll rugs. You light fires. The first Ottoman Adhan, call to prayer, rises from a makeshift minaret, fashioned from a broken bell tower. It is the first Muslim prayer ever publicly called on European soil, and the wind carries it far. But this was no random town. Gallipoli guards the straits. It sits right at the seam between Asia and Europe, like a cork in the wine bottle of the Balkans. Whoever controls it can move armies, goods, spies, ideas. And that's exactly what happens. Suddenly, Ottoman horsemen are riding on European roads. They raid Thrace. They probe Greek villages. They map the hills around Philippopolis. And before long, you see not just raiders, but planners, surveyors, tax agents, imams, and scribes with heavy books. This isn't just conquest. This is settlement. Now for your quirky detail. After capturing Gallipoli, Suleiman Pasha ordered Muslim refugees from Anatolia, mostly those displaced by Mongol invasions or Seljuk collapse, to resettle in the ruined town. Think about that. He didn't just move soldiers in, he moved families with sheep, bakers, masons, school teachers. Gallipoli didn't just become a garrison, it became a neighborhood. Ottomans didn't merely invade Europe, they moved in from a distance. Constantinople watches in disbelief. Emperor John Cantacuzenus, who just recently allied with the Ottomans during his civil war, panics. This wasn't part of the deal. You remember his voice months ago, promising Orhan land and marriage rights in exchange for troops. He thought the Ottomans would fight, win, and go home. But Orhan knew better. Europe had always been a fantasy, a crusader's dream. But now, the roles are reversed. The border between East and West isn't a wall, it's a bridge. And the Ottomans just built the first span with stone, silver, and silence. And now, the historical debate: was Gallipoli's occupation a calculated plan or just lucky timing? Some historians argue that the Ottomans had long eyed Europe, and the earthquake simply gave them the excuse they needed. The swift settlement, infrastructure repair, and strategic use of the port town suggest this wasn't an accident. It was a chess move. Others believe it was opportunistic improvisation, that Suleiman just saw a good thing and grabbed it before anyone else could blink. After all, the Byzantines were weakened, and there were no treaties stopping them from crossing. But once taken, Gallipoli wasn't given back, even when Emperor John begged Orhan to withdraw. The answer was a calm, bureaucratic no. The town is not yours anymore, Orhan wrote. It belongs to those who hold it. Classic Ottoman cool. So what changes now? Everything. From Gallipoli, the Ottomans begin raiding deeper into Thrace, then claiming towns. They establish garrisons in Didymoteicho, Kirklareli, and Edirne, which will soon become a new capital. Suddenly, Europe is a theater, not just a dream. More importantly, Gallipoli proves a strategic pattern the Ottomans will repeat again and again. Strike during instability, hold strategically, settle systematically, integrate administratively, and always pay your soldiers on time. By the time the European powers realize what's happening, the Ottomans aren't raiders anymore. They're neighbors. You sit atop the fortress wall of Gallipoli as the call to prayer rises again. This time, it's louder, clearer. A young boy tucks a basket of bread under his arm, walking home through what was once a ghost town and is now a growing port. You realize something profound. This isn't the edge of something, it's the beginning. Your boots are soaked with blood and dew, and the hills smell like firewood, garlic, and the iron tang of ambition. This is not Anatolia anymore. This is Balkan country, a jigsaw of valleys, fortresses, and petty kings, where the only constant is that nothing stays constant for long. And you, a Gazi turned courtier turned scout, are now marching under the banner of a new sultan. His name? Murad I, the son of Orhan. The next piece on the board. And he is about to stir the Balkans like a pot left too long on the fire. Let's start with the mainstream fact. In the decades following the conquest of Gallipoli, 1354, the Ottomans expanded rapidly into the Balkans, absorbing territory through a mixture of military conquest, marriage alliances, vassalage, and brutal opportunism. Murad II took the Ottoman seat in 1362 and within a decade had captured Adrianople, Edirne, a Byzantine jewel not far from Constantinople, and made it his new capital. That alone is telling. He didn't rule from Asia. He ruled from Europe. And that was a message. You remember the ride into Adrianople. The old Greek church towers still stood, crooked and ringing nervously. Banners fluttered from every balcony, some surrendering, some resisting. The streets were strangely quiet, except for the rustle of carts carrying in new law books and prayer rugs. Edirne. It sounds like home now, but it's a statement. The Ottomans aren't raiding anymore. They're ruling. And while they settle into Edirne's marble halls and wine-stained vineyards, Murad's gaze turns deeper inland. Now here's the thing. The Balkans in the 14th century were a complete mess. Let's recap the players. The Serbian Empire is strong on paper, but cracking from within since the death of Tsar Dushan. The Bulgarian Tsardom is hanging on like a sick hawk, unsure which way to flap. The Byzantines, still arguing over which cousin gets which crumbling port town, and all around them are smaller Slavic princes, Albanian warlords, Greek magnates, and Vlach chieftains, each with their own flag, feud, and fragile ego. It's a blender of thrones, and someone just pressed the button. Murad steps in, smiling quietly. He brings troops, yes, but also marriage proposals, letters in elegant Persian, and bags of silver to sweeten negotiations. This brings us to your quirky detail. Murad's court begins practicing something called devshirme in the Balkans. Yes, the blood tax. Young Christian boys from conquered or vassal Balkan villages are taken, converted to Islam, and trained to become elite soldiers and bureaucrats. What would become the famed Janissaries? At first, it's terrifying, but over time, many Balkan families begin to offer their sons voluntarily, seeing the devshirme as a path to wealth, power, even literacy. Think of it. One generation is conquered, the next is commanding. You meet one of these boys, now a young officer named Ali Bey, born as Petar, He speaks Turkish like a poet, but sings Serbian lullabies to himself when drunk. His mother still prays for him in a ruined monastery in Skopje. History in the Ottoman machine is not erased, it is rewritten. Back to Murad. He pushes inland and meets resistance. A lot of it. The Battle of Maritsa, 1371, becomes a bloody example. A Serbian force, led by King Vukašin and his brother Jovan Uglješa, marches to stop the Ottoman advance. Confident, perhaps arrogant, they camp by the Maritsa River. At night, Ottoman forces under Lala Shahin Pasha launch a surprise attack. The result? A massacre. So many Serbian soldiers die that the river is said to have run red for days. Locals call it Serbs' River afterward. After that, the Serbs are cautious. Some become vassals, pledging tribute and troops to Murad. Others dig in and wait for winter or miracles. Now comes the historical debate. Did the Ottomans expand with consent or coercion in the Balkans? One camp argues that the Ottomans imposed domination through fear and military might, especially with tools like the devshirme and janissary corps, which many modern historians see as state-sponsored child conscription. Another view holds that the Ottomans offered a better deal to many Balkan nobles than their local overlords did. Tribute in exchange for protection, a spot at court, or survival. Even some monasteries were left untouched as long as they paid tax. The truth? Probably a twisted vine of both. Because here's the Ottoman genius. You don't have to be liked if you're useful. By the late 1370s, the Balkans are a chessboard, and Murad has most of the bishops. He installs garrisons in Nis, Skopje, Sofia, and Plovdiv. He builds roads. He starts recording land grants and converting churches into mosques. But carefully, not all at once. He's not just a conqueror, he's an administrator. And for now, the Balkans allow it, because trade continues, borders stabilize, and taxes are collected without fire and sword, mostly. But under the surface, resentment brews. You hear whispers of a new Serbian prince, one who's clever, calculating, and just as ambitious as Murad. His name? Lazar. And while Murad thinks he's holding the blender's lid tight, Prince Lazar is about to press puree. But that's a story for later. You sit by a Balkan river as dusk settles over the hills. You hear prayers in 3 languages, smell lamb roasting from 3 kitchens, and see soldiers from 3 kingdoms sharing wine and lies. This is the Ottoman Balkans now, not conquered, not free, just blending. You wake before the sun does. The hills are still black silhouettes, and dew clings to your boots like guilt. The horses haven't yet started their soft chorus of snorts and stomps, but already your sultan is awake. Murad Fruan, son of Orhan, ruler of Edirne, master of Gallipoli, conqueror of Bulgaria and Serbia, not by blood, always, but by calculation. He sits cross-legged beneath a fig tree, playing chess with himself. You've seen him do this before, each piece carved from ivory or sandalwood, their shapes worn by weather and war. One bishop is missing a nose. The queen has scorch marks on her crown. But Murad never plays with a perfect board. He doesn't trust it, because this is how he sees the world. Not as a battlefield, but a board. And every king, every prince, every noble, a piece to be moved, outmaneuvered, or if necessary, removed. And lately, the board is getting crowded. Let's open with your mainstream historical fact. By the 1380s, Murad I had expanded Ottoman power across the Balkans, reducing many Serbian and Bulgarian lords to vassals, demanding tribute and troops, while letting them keep their titles. His court in Edirne became the political center of a transcontinental empire. But this expansion wasn't just brute force. It was a game of alliances, feudal webs, and ideological chess. Murad often married off his daughters, made strategic appointments, and used vassalage to absorb territory without lifting a sword, only if the sword didn't work first. And yet, not every piece cooperated. You remember the messengers arriving at camp, horses steaming, scrolls sealed in wax so thick they could have stopped arrows, names pouring from lips like curses and blessings. Prince Lazar of Serbia, proud, clever, cautious, a vassal, but only on paper. King Turtko of Bosnia, ambitious, cagey, sometimes Catholic, sometimes Orthodox, depending on the weather. Ivan Shishman of Bulgaria, cornered, paranoid, and hiding behind the Black Sea like it's a mother's skirt. Each of them plays nice with Murad. They bow, they send gifts, they smile, and each of them waits for the right moment to bite. Here's your quirky detail. Murad I was so obsessed with legitimacy and the appearance of divine rule that he gave himself the title Sultan-ı-Rum, Sultan of Rome. Yes, Rome, not Constantinople, not Anatolia, but Rome, as in the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire. A calculated insult and ambition wrapped in Persian flourishes and Arabic ink. Murad was already acting like the new Roman emperor, even as the real emperor in Constantinople was writing letters begging for Western help. Even the chess set he used, according to later scribes, had its rook pieces shaped like Byzantine towers, and he allegedly moved them with 2 fingers, whispering, "Rome never defends herself." Was it true? Maybe not. But his scribes made it feel true, and that's what mattered. So here's how Murad plays the chessboard. He keeps Prince Lazar as a vassal, but doesn't trust him. Too many whispers, too many missing taxes. He lets the Byzantines rot behind their walls. They're already dead, just don't know it yet. He places Turkic governors, beys, in newly acquired Balkan towns with orders to tax lightly but enforce Sharia strictly. He grants land, taimars, to soldiers in place of salary, encouraging loyalty and colonization all in one move. He expands the Janissary Corps, many of whom are now Christian-born sons, taken from Serbian and Albanian villages. Their loyalty, not to blood, but to the state. And then he waits, because he knows something most kings forget. If you set the board right, the other players will defeat themselves. And here's the scholarly debate that makes this period spicy. Was Murad building an empire of tolerance or a machine of subtle domination? Some historians argue that Murad was remarkably flexible in governing Christians. Churches remained open. Bishops continued to preach. Local lords kept titles and lands. This, they say, made the Ottoman system attractive, even to some Orthodox subjects tired of squabbling dynasties. But others claim it was a facade of soft power, hiding hard control. The tribute demanded was heavy. The Devshirme system, however meritocratic, still involved child abduction, and Murad's alliances were only as stable as his army's position. Even Lazar's vassalage was possibly a tactical pause, not genuine submission. Was this empire a new Rome, or just a smarter form of conquest? You've heard both sides. You've translated the tax scrolls. You've seen the children lined up for conscription, and the bishops nodding through Friday prayers. You're not sure what to believe anymore. But let's return to the chessboard. Murad, in his tent, is moving a bishop toward a rook. He's humming a melody. Some say it's an old Persian war song. Others, a lullaby from Bilichik. Then his vizier enters. A simple bow, a whisper. You strain to hear, and you catch just one word. Lazar. The game stops. Murad closes the board, places the black queen on top, and stands. He knows. The Serbs are moving, and this time, they aren't alone. Whispers of a coalition, a true Balkan alliance, are rising. Lazar may have united the Slavic princes. The Bosnians are sending troops. Even Hungary is sniffing the wind. And all roads, every wagon rut and caravan trail lead to one place, Kosovo. You ride ahead of the army now. The chessboard burned into your brain. You're not sure if Murad's plan is to crush, to outthink, or to bait. But one thing is clear. The pieces are in place. The kings are facing off, and the board is trembling. You wake up to the smell of blood, already drying in the sun. And the worst part is, you haven't even drawn your sword yet. The field of Kosovo, flat and endless, like a giant's dining table, stretches before you. It's June 28th, 1389, and the birds haven't returned since dawn. Even the wind seems hesitant. You're here, not as a soldier, not exactly. You're one of Murad's scribes, but everyone fights when the stakes are this high. Behind you are the Ottomans, tens of thousands strong, banners snapping, scimitars glinting. In front of you, a coalition of Serbs, Bosnians, Albanians, and Hungarians, marshaled under Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović, a man who bowed to Murad as a vassal and now brandishes a crucifix over a war horse. You've heard the sermons. You've seen the prophecies. They say this day will echo through ages. They don't know the half of it. Let's begin with the mainstream historical fact. The Battle of Kosovo, 1389, was one of the most consequential confrontations between the rising Ottoman Empire and the fragmented Christian forces of the Balkans. Both Sultan Murad I and Prince Lazar died during the battle, an extremely rare event in medieval warfare. But here's the twist. Militarily, it was a draw. The Ottomans suffered heavy casualties. Their sultan was assassinated, but the Serbian army was shattered. And while both sides mourned their dead, only one side had a second son, a succession plan, and tens of thousands of reserves marching from Anatolia. It was a draw on paper, but on the board of empires, it was a move that broke the Balkans forever. The morning starts with rituals. On the Ottoman side, the Janissaries kneel facing Mecca. The Sipahi cavalry tighten their belts, check their saddles, whisper old prayers. Sultan Murad stands tall, flanked by his sons Bayezid and Yaqub, both vying for his eye, his approval, and perhaps his throne. Meanwhile, across the field, Prince Lazar gathers his lords. The white cross of the Serbian Orthodox Church flutters on shields and tabards. They take communion from mobile altars. Priests chant from battered scrolls. And in the rising tension, a story begins to grow. Here's your quirky detail. That morning, a Serbian nobleman named Miloš Obilić allegedly entered the Ottoman camp on the pretext of defecting, a traitor bearing valuable information. Instead, according to legend, he slipped through the tent guards, stabbed Sultan Murad in the stomach, and was immediately hacked to death. Was it true? We're not sure. Some Ottoman sources say Murad was killed after the battle, while inspecting the field. Others suggest he died in combat. But Miloš Obilić, whether fact or myth, became a national icon, the Balkan equivalent of Leonidas, except sneakier. In modern Serbia, there are statues of Miloš, paintings, epic poems. School children grow up reciting his name as the last knight of Christendom, the dagger-wielding martyr who killed a sultan to save his king. He may have never existed, but on the battlefield of Kosovo, myth had more staying power than steel. Then comes the clash. You hear it before you see it. A low thunder, hooves and shouts, merging into a sound that isn't just noise. It's history folding in on itself. The Ottoman left wing advances. Arrows fly, drums pound. The Serbian knights charge like a silver hammer, breaking lines, splintering spears. Prince Lazar rides at the front, flanked by his vassals. Their armor glows like coins in firelight. And then, chaos. The center buckles. Janissaries surge. The Serbian flank disintegrates. Bosnian reinforcements arrive, but too late. Prince Lazar is captured, or maybe he dies in the melee, sword in hand. No one knows who dealt the fatal blow. The only thing certain is that Murad lies dead, and Lazar lies beside him. Here's your historical debate. Was Kosovo a Serbian defeat or an Ottoman one? Western chroniclers at the time assumed the Ottomans had lost. After all, their sultan was dead, and news spread fast. Some even said Christianity had won a miracle. But within months, Murad's son Bayezid moved fast. He murdered his brother Yaqub, consolidating power within a day of the battle, and proclaimed himself Bayezid the Furs, Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. The Ottomans kept expanding. Serbia, meanwhile, fell into disarray, with vassal princes offering tribute once more. So who really won? Some historians today argue that Kosovo was a Pyrrhic victory for the Ottomans. Bloody and costly, yes, but structurally advantageous. Serbia never recovered its full strength. Bosnia was exhausted. Hungary distracted. But for the Serbs, Kosovo became more than just a battle. It became the beating heart of a national identity, a symbol of sacrifice, a sacral wound, a place where heaven met earth and everything broke. And now, centuries later, it's still breaking. You stand over the body of your sultan, watching Bayezid kneel, sword in hand. The men around him whisper, some in awe, some in fear. He's barely 20, but he radiates something sharp and undeniable. He doesn't cry, doesn't pray. He just says, the empire bleeds, but it breathes. And then he orders Yaqub's death without blinking. A single empire, one head, no rivals. You ride away from Kosovo that evening with mud on your boots and poetry in your ears. The Janissaries sing a low hymn. The peasants bury their dead. No banners fly, only smoke. Kosovo becomes a story long before it becomes a memory. In Serbian epics, it becomes a tragedy of betrayed glory. In Ottoman scrolls, it becomes a rite of passage. In Europe, it becomes a ghost of what might have been. But for you, it's just the place where two kings died on the same day, and one empire learned how to survive death. The body of Murad lies barely cold in a blood-slicked tent outside Kosovo. But his son, Bayezid, wastes no time with mourning. You are there, standing outside, as the command tent trembles, not from grief, but from shouts. Inside, Yaqub, the younger brother, is still alive. Not for long. Bayezid's eyes are red, not from tears, but from exhaustion and something else, something harder. Calculation. His father lies assassinated. The battle is barely won, and two heirs are one too many. There's no trial, no family council, no slow poisoning, just an order, whispered, then screamed, then obeyed. Yaqub is strangled with a silk bowstring that night, and by morning, Bayezid is sultan. No coronation, no ceremony, just silence. And then the drumbeat of hoofbeats as he rides away from Kosovo with one goal: hold the empire together with one fist and punch Europe in the face with the other. Let's start with the mainstream historical fact. Bayezid I, nicknamed Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, reigned from 1389 to 1402 and became one of the most ambitious, terrifying, and militarily aggressive sultans the Ottomans had ever produced. His expansion was lightning fast, his rule centralized, and his temper volcanic. In less than a decade, he doubled Ottoman territory and shattered Balkan resistance with speed that terrified European monarchs. He did not govern by waiting, he governed by hitting first. And here's your quirky detail. Bayezid was known for being so fast on campaign that his men swore he never slept in the same tent twice. Some even claimed he drank vinegar straight before battle to sour his patience, making him more aggressive. A strange man, a brutal man, but one who moved like lightning down a copper wire, where his father Murad had expanded patiently, siege by siege. Bayezid tore across borders like a man late for destiny. He was the empire's first general sultan, sleeping in armor and barking orders between gulps of goat milk. His favorite motto? Opposed sword rusts. You march with him into Serbia again, but this time there's no Lazar to stop him. Instead, Bayezid marries Lazar's daughter, Princess Olivera, and reduces the once proud Serbian principality into a vassal. Serbia now pays taxes to the man who killed their king, and their princess becomes Bayezid's consort. This isn't love, it's realpolitik, Ottoman style. He also marries the Byzantine emperor's daughter, and a Tatar princess, and several Anatolian Beylik nobles' daughters, just to make sure no one can touch him without touching 10 alliances at once. His harem is a map, and his ambition is bigger than any tent. Let's look at what he conquers, and how fast. Thessaly, 1390, snapped up in a single campaign season. Wallachia, 1395, nearly crushed Vlad I of Wallachia, an earlier prince, not Vlad the Impaler yet. Be patient, he's coming. Bosnia and Bulgaria, forced into vassalage. Even Hungary quivers as Bayezid launches raids so deep into Central Europe that the villagers mistake him for a thunder god. But he's not just cutting west. He turns back toward Anatolia, where small Turkish beyliks, nomadic emirates, are still independent. Bayezid says, no more. He storms through Karaman, Aydın, Sarukan, Menteşe, and more. What once was a patchwork of Turkish warlords becomes an Ottoman carpet, thick, bloody, and centralized. He does what Murad never dared. He declares himself Sultan of Rum, heir to the Seljuks, and master of all Turkish Muslims. Some say the ulama, Islamic scholars, whisper uneasily at his arrogance, but most nod. After all, he keeps winning. Here's where things get fiery. In 1394, Bayezid besieges Constantinople. Yes, that Constantinople, the jewel of the Christian East, the Rome that wasn't Rome anymore. He surrounds it with a fury, builds Anadolu Hisarı, a fortress on the Asian side of the Bosporus, to choke the city's supply lines. Byzantine Emperor Manuel II writes panicked letters to France, England, the Pope, anyone who will read them. And the Pope answers. Cue the Crusade of Nicopolis, 1396. Imagine it like this. A band of the worst LARPers in European history, swaggering knights from France, Burgundy, Hungary, and the Holy Roman Empire, ride east to save Constantinople and stop the Muslim tide. They bring bright flags, ornate armor, expensive wines. They call Bayezid a barbarian. He calls them dead men walking. At Nicopolis, the Crusaders charge with full arrogance and zero coordination. They trample over their own infantry, ignore the warnings of the Wallachian vassals who know the terrain, and fall into a trap worthy of Aesop. Bayezid annihilates them. French nobility is wiped out. The Danube runs thick. Bayezid personally orders the execution of thousands of prisoners, leaving only a few nobles alive for ransom. He allegedly says, "They came for my city. I gave them a grave instead." Europe is stunned. Nicopolis becomes the last great crusade of the Middle Ages. Bayezid becomes the nightmare they can't unsee. Now, the historical debate. Was Bayezid's ambition his strength or his undoing? Some scholars argue that Bayezid was the perfect military ruler. Fast, brutal, and visionary. He unified Anatolia, humbled the Balkans, nearly crushed Constantinople. If he had lived longer, they say, he might have taken Vienna before 1500. Others disagree. They say Bayezid overreached. His thirst for conquest alienated allies, and his aggressive absorption of Turkish beyliks made him a target not just for Christian Europe, but for the Muslim East, specifically for Timur the Lame. Yes, that Timur, the one with pyramids of skulls and a chip on his shoulder the size of Persia. But that's for the next chapter. You ride with Bayezid in the twilight of his glory. He's not smiling. He never smiles. But his eyes glitter with something fierce as he stares eastward. Rome, he mutters, nodding toward Constantinople's silhouette. And after that, Vienna. And after that, heaven. But behind you, Timur's spies are already taking notes, and the thunder, for all its noise, can't last forever. You find yourself in the shadow of Constantinople, a city that refuses to die. It's 1395, maybe 1396. No one is entirely sure. Dates blur when the same siege never seems to end. The Ottoman tents are camped outside. Again, their banners flap like teeth in the wind. Bayezid the Thunderbolt paces inside his pavilion like a caged panther, hurling cups, threats, and coins at whatever scribe annoys him most. He has everything. Territory from the Danube to Konya. He smashed crusaders at Nicopolis, turned half the Balkans into his vassals, married every princess he didn't kill. And yet, that one city still mocks him from across the moat. Let's begin with the mainstream fact. In the late 1390s, Sultan Bayezid I began the first major siege of Constantinople since the Fourth Crusade. He surrounded the city from the land, built the Anadolu Hisar fortress on the Bosporus in 1394 to choke off its trade, and demanded surrender. The Byzantines refused, but this wasn't 1204 anymore. Constantinople was now a shrunken, starving shell of its old imperial glory. The city's population had collapsed. Neighborhoods were fields. Whole districts had returned to nature. Yet the walls stood, and so did the idea of Rome. And that idea was infuriating to Bayezid. He didn't just want the city, he wanted its myth. Here's your quirky detail. Bayezid was so eager to break Constantinople that he allegedly forbade the use of siege engines at first. He wanted to starve the city, not destroy it. He imagined himself walking in like Caesar, not stomping in like a barbarian. He thought the mere sight of his army would be enough. It wasn't, so he tightened the noose, ordering his navy to cut off all Black Sea traffic, and sending agents into the city to incite rebellion. He even reportedly offered the citizens better taxes than their own emperor, which, to be fair, wasn't a hard sell. The Byzantines were broke, but the walls of Theodosius, built 1,000 years earlier, still stood like a divine dare. Triple layered, iron gated, studded with towers and prayer. And inside, Emperor Manuel the Cid Palaiologos wasn't just praying. He was writing letters, lots of them. So begins a diplomatic panic, unlike any other. Imagine being the Pope in Avignon, getting a scroll that reads something like, "Help! Rome 2.0 is dying. Turks everywhere. Send knights, money, or Jesus. Urgently. Love, Manuel." Letters fly to France, England, Venice, Hungary, even Ming China. No joke? The Byzantines were that desperate. But after Nicopolis, Europe isn't eager to rush east again. Crusading has gone out of fashion like cod pieces and chivalry. Nobody wants to be the next noble skewered by an Anatolian archer. Bayezid, meanwhile, is getting impatient. He brings out the siege towers, the mangonels, the trebuchets. He tries bribery, then threats, then blockades again. Still nothing. Then winter comes, and with it, something else. Here's where the real thunder rumbles. From the east rides a name you've been hearing in whispers. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, the warlord of Samarkand, the man who turned Baghdad into a skull orchard. He's not like Bayezid, where Bayezid builds castles and demands tribute. Timur burns cities just to watch the flames dance. He's not a sultan. He's a storm in human shape. And he's been watching Anatolia with hungry eyes. In 1339, as Bayezid tightens his grip on Constantinople, Timur makes a move. He begins seizing eastern Anatolian cities, Erzincan, Sivas, and even Malatya. The Ottoman beyliks, the small Turkish emirates that Bayezid swallowed, start writing to Timur, "Please come, free us from the thunderbolt." Bayezid's war councils grow quieter. His advisors are divided. Does he finish Constantinople? Or does he turn and face Timur? The city taunts him. But the East threatens to undo his entire empire. And then, to everyone's shock, Bayezid lifts the siege. Let's dive into the historical debate. Did Timur save Constantinople? Most historians say yes, indirectly. Bayezid was on the verge of breaking the city, or at least starving it into surrender. But the threat of Timur's invasion forced him to redirect his armies, ending the longest, most dangerous siege Constantinople had faced since the 13th century. Some scholars argue the city might have held out anyway, thanks to its walls, its strategic sea access, and Byzantine desperation. But few deny that Timur's threat changed everything. So, in a twist of fate, a Muslim warlord saved the Christian city without ever setting foot near it. History's weird like that. You ride with Bayezid as the camp is broken. He stares back at Constantinople one last time. There's rage in his eyes, but also something deeper. Frustration, maybe even regret. He mutters, "Let them pray a little longer. The hammer must turn east." And so the Ottomans withdraw. Inside the city, church bells ring. The citizens weep with joy. Byzantine priests hold midnight vigils, thanking God for a miracle. But you ride toward the east, toward smoke on the horizon, because Timur is coming, and Bayezid, the thunderbolt, is about to face a storm he can't outrun. You wake up in Anatolia, but the map no longer makes sense. The banners are torn, the roads are broken. The messengers come and go, each with a different seal, each claiming a different master. The Ottoman Empire, that solid swelling wave you once rode with Bayezid, has cracked into so many jagged splinters that even the birds get confused flying across the provinces. And it all started with one battle, one moment of thunder that left silence in its wake. The Battle of Ankara, 1402, the day Timur arrived. Let's begin with the mainstream fact. In July 1402, Timur, Tamerlane, met Bayezid on the plain outside Ankara. The two greatest powers in the Muslim world collided, and it was no contest. Bayezid, ever the gambler, chose to march east, abandoning the siege of Constantinople to confront the rising threat. He assembled a massive force, bolstered by Balkan vassals, Turkmen troops, and Serbian contingents, under his son-in-law, Stefan Lazarevich. But Timur, he brought the steppe. Elephants armored like tanks. Mongol horsemen who had grown up with death as a lullaby. Siege engineers who turned fortresses to dust and left pyramids of skulls behind. And a mind that played war like chess, blindfolded with both hands tied and still somehow winning. Bayezid lost everything. His army was shattered, his camp plundered, and the Sultan himself captured. Here's your quirky detail. Timur allegedly kept Bayezid in a golden cage, literally, a portable prison of latticed metal, carried from court to court, like a spoiled prize, paraded for show. Some say Bayezid was chained like a dog, mocked during banquets. Others say Timur offered him respect and occasional wine, depending on his mood. And then there's the tale, half fable, half insult, that Bayezid's wife was forced to serve Timur at dinner, just to remind everyone who held the leash. Bayezid died in captivity within a year. Some say it was suicide, others illness, and some whisper it was grief, because whatever else Bayezid was, he believed in his empire, and now it lay in pieces. Now let's look at the map. When Bayezid fell, the Ottomans fell with him. Sons of the Sultan, he had at least 4 contenders, began slicing up Anatolia like it was a roast duck, and they were all starving. You've got Suleiman holding Rumelia, the Balkan territories, ruling from Edirne like a Western prince with Venetian advisors and Christian allies. Isa claiming Bursa, the old capital, but failing to hold it for long. Musa rising from obscurity to become the Balkan warlord for a time. And Mehmed, the youngest, watching, waiting, and planning from Amasya in the east. This period becomes known as the Ottoman Interregnum, or more dramatically, the Fetret Devri, the time of disorder and its absolute chaos. You now travel through a land where every village has a different allegiance. Every fortress has switched flags twice that week, and every brother dreams of murdering the others in the name of unity. It's a civil war, but Ottoman style. That means diplomats sent one day and assassins the next. That means poets writing odes one week and elegies the next. That means brothers, actual brothers, clashing in cavalry duels over rivers once called sacred. 1 minute you're drinking coffee in Bursa. The next, the city's been burned, and the coffee tastes like ash. It's not just the Ottomans who are confused. The Byzantines, the Venetians, the Serbs, even the Mamluks of Egypt start meddling, picking favorites, switching sides, writing treaties they know will be broken tomorrow. Suleiman allies with the Byzantines to fight Musa. Musa burns monasteries to pressure the Serbs. Mehmed pretends to support both, while secretly scheming their downfall. And here's the scholarly debate. Was the interregnum a fatal blow that almost destroyed the Ottomans? Some historians say yes. They argue that without Mehmed Worthi, the Ottomans might have ended like so many other beyliks, torn apart by internal strife, eaten by neighbors, remembered only as a footnote in Venetian trade ledgers. Others say no. The Ottoman system, though shaken, proved incredibly resilient. Despite Timur's rampage, despite losing a sultan, despite fratricide and famine, the empire's administrative core held on. The Devshirme system kept functioning. Taxes still got collected. Somehow, janissaries still got paid. It was a break, yes, but not a collapse. Still, for about 11 years, nobody knew if the crescent would rise again. You sit beside Mehmed now. He's young, quiet, but there's steel in his stare. He's watching maps, measuring river crossings, thinking 2 brothers ahead. By 1413, he's had enough of the squabbling. One by one, he picks off his rivals, defeating Musa in battle, watching Suleiman fall in disgrace, and pushing aside pretenders like they were chess pawns. And then, just like that, the noise stops. The empire has a sultan again, Mehmed Duaif, the restorer, the calm after the storm. But you know better. Calm is temporary. Empires don't forget being broken. They just pretend it never happened. For now, the Sultanate is whole. The thrones are back in place. The scribes are writing again, and the drums no longer beat for fratricide. But somewhere beyond the Bosporus, eyes still watch. Europe still remembers the thunderbolt's fall, and Constantinople still stands, waiting. So here you are, standing behind Mehmed Darfurn, not the conqueror, not the thunderbolt, not the dreamer of empires, just Mehmed, the weaver, the restorer, the man who somehow stitched the Ottoman tapestry back together after his father's ruin and his brother's bloodbath. You don't hear trumpets. There are no parades, no blinding displays of might. Instead, there's the soft rustle of paper, the tapping of scribes, the low thunder of bureaucracy rebooting. Because Mehmed I isn't here to conquer. He's here to survive and make the empire breathe again. Mainstream fact. After emerging victorious in the Ottoman interregnum, Mehmed ruled from 1413 to 1421, stabilizing a shattered realm. But ruling here doesn't mean planting flags or building walls. It means something subtler, healing. He mends relations with the Byzantines. He patches Ottoman authority in the Balkans, holding vassals together, not with fear, but familiarity. He reinstates Islamic law and softens religious tensions. He even restrains his janissaries, for now, while his predecessors expanded like a wildfire. Mehmed's reign is more like tending embers, careful not to smother them, careful not to let them go out. The empire needed a rest, so he gave it one quirky detail. You might picture Ottoman sultans as robed titans astride thrones of ivory. But Mehmed Werf, he spent much of his life not on a throne, but on the run. In the chaos after Ankara, he wasn't crowned, he was hiding. One chronicler describes him disguised in plain clothes, slipping through war-torn cities, while soldiers searched for royal blood. Another tale says he wandered into Amasya under false name, living among commoners, hearing how they cursed or praised the name Osmanlı. Whether true or myth, Mehmed's taste of anonymity seems to have stuck. His court was quieter, his punishments measured. He rarely gave speeches, but when he did, his voice was low and careful, like someone still expecting to be betrayed. He wasn't born to rule. He crawled his way back to the throne, tread by tread. Now imagine your hands, They're sticky with wax from too many imperial seals. Your ears ring from endless debates between imams, generals, and aging beys. Every faction demands something. The ulama want a return to piety. The Janissaries want pay and prestige. The Balkans want fewer taxes. The Turkic tribes want land and leniency. And the Byzantines, oh, they want time. Time to fortify, to recover, to wait out the next Ottoman thunderstorm. But Mehmed doesn't bring storms. He brings balance. He rebuilds institutions, not temples. He restores tax networks and trade routes, not monuments. And when rebellions flare up, from the Balkans to eastern Anatolia, he puts them down quickly, but without cruelty. That's the trick. He's not just healing the empire's wounds. He's making sure they don't scar. The scholars debate. Was Mehmed versus a great sultan, or just a lucky placeholder? There's a divide here. Some historians praise Mehmed as the keystone, without whom the Ottomans would have collapsed into a forgettable dynasty of regional warlords. They call him the second founder, the man who proved empire could survive not just conquest, but catastrophe. Others argue he merely bought time, inheriting the survival instincts of the state rather than shaping them. That it was his son, Murad II, and grandson, Mehmed II, who truly redefined the Ottomans. But the more poetic view is this. Without Mehmed I, there would be no Constantinople to conquer. Without Mehmed II, there would be no Kanuni, Suleiman the Magnificent. Without Mehmed I, the story ends in 1402, with Timur grinning and Anatolia in pieces. So yes, maybe Mehmed isn't the flashiest sultan, but he's the one who picked up the thread. Let's follow him into his later years. You're in Edirne, the de facto capital. It smells of apricots and parchment. The mosques hum with soft prayers. The bazaars begin to pulse again with voices, trade, and rumor. Mehmed sits beside a low table, combing through dispatches. One speaks of the Venetians arming galleys. Another warns that rebels stir in Karaman. Still others speak of Byzantine walls, looking sturdier than ever. But he doesn't panic. He delegates. He smiles, barely. He returns to work, because his job was never to finish the story, only to ensure the next chapter could be written. He dies in 1421, quietly, and is buried in Bursa, in a mausoleum with green tiles and modest script. His tomb does not boast. It whispers, and his son, Murad II, ascends the throne. A different man, a different style, younger, bolder, with sharper lines drawn between friend and foe. But he inherits a unified empire, not a battlefield. And for that, he bows, however briefly, at his father's tomb. You, reader, time traveler, whisperer of fate, you walked beside the conquerors, the gamblers, the dreamers. But Mehmed, he was none of those. He was the thread in the tapestry, the silent weaver. And because he did not let it unravel, the Ottomans still stand. for now. So now, it's your turn to shadow Murad II, the boy who inherits fire. You're back in Edirne, where the marble is still warm from Mehmed Burn's fingers. But the mood? It's brittle, sharp. There's no silence, no soft parchment rustle, just the clanging of steel, the barking of orders, and the relentless crackle of rebellion. Murad isn't a patient restorer like his father. He's a fighter with too much war to ignore and too many enemies to count. And if Mehmed I was the weaver, Murad II is the man who tries to walk the burning thread without falling off. Mainstream fact. Murad II reigned twice. First from 1421 to 1444, and again from 1446 to 1451. And during that time, he fought almost constantly. You'd think after all the Ottoman chaos, from Timur's invasion and the interregnum, people would be exhausted. Nope. The minute Mehmed Bern dies, the vultures dive. The Byzantine emperor releases Mustafa Çelebi, Murad's uncle, and declares him the real sultan. A full-blown civil war erupts. Then the Genoese interfere. Then Anatolian beyliks rise again. Then Venice sniffs opportunity in the Aegean. And of course, in the background, always, the Hungarians, the Serbs, the Wallachians, the Albanians, all sharpening blades for the moment the Ottomans flinch. Murad doesn't flinch. He draws a circle of fire around the empire, and he fights everyone who steps into it. Quirky detail. Murad II may be the only Ottoman sultan who actually tried to retire and got dragged back to the throne by a teenager. In 1444, exhausted from years of battle, Murad abdicates. He gives the crown to his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II. Yes, that Mehmed, future conqueror of Constantinople. Murad retreats to Manisa, a quiet city in western Anatolia, where he writes poetry, reads Persian verse, and even tends gardens. But Europe sees a boy on the throne and pounces. A massive crusade forms, backed by the Pope, Hungary, Poland, and Venice. They march south, thinking the Ottomans are done. And then a messenger arrives in Manisa. It's Mehmed, and all he says is, "Father, please come back." Murad sighs, folds his robe, grabs his sword, and returns. What follows is the Battle of Varna, 1444, where Murad crushes the Christian coalition, kills King Władysław of Poland, and ends the crusade in one afternoon. Then, as if annoyed, he goes back to gardening. For now. Imagine standing behind him on the battlefield, his armors darkened by sweat and blood, his eyes sharper than ever. He doesn't ride like a hero. He rides like a man who's sick of being betrayed. Again and again, he crushes Mustafa Çelebi at Ulubad. He destroys the Karamanids in Anatolia. He pushes the Byzantines back into their shrinking shell. At every corner of the empire, fire. And Murad? He walks the perimeter, stamping it out, but it costs him. His trust erodes. He begins to rely more on the Janissaries, who grow bolder and more political. His viziers squabble. Even his son begins to outgrow him. He's not just fighting enemies. He's fighting entropy. And that's a war no sultan ever truly wins. The scholars debate. Was Murad II a war hero? Or just a placeholder for Mehmed the Conqueror? Some say Murad's reign was reactive, that he didn't shape the empire, merely protected it long enough for his son to do something more. After all, the grand prize, Constantinople, remained untouched. The Balkans, still rebellious. The Janissaries, more powerful than ever. But others push back. They point out that Murad laid the groundwork for Mehmed's triumph. He built the roads that would bring cannons to Constantinople. He stabilized the tax systems, modernized the army supply lines, and forged alliances when needed. Most importantly, he taught Mehmed how to lose, how to wait, and how to strike. Without Murad's slow, bitter mastery of war, there is no conquest. There's only fire and ashes. Picture Edirne again. This time, there's smoke on the breeze. The palace is half empty. Murad is on campaign again, and Mehmed's fingers are inching toward maps of Constantinople. You watch as Murad returns. Again. His beard is graying, his shoulders stooped, but his eyes still scan the horizon, as if expecting another revolt, another lie, another crusade. And then one day in 1451, the fire circle dims. Murad dies. There is no grand parade, no thunderbolt in the sky, just a transition, just Mehmed, stepping out from his father's shadow, now fully sultan. But make no mistake, the empire Mehmed inherits isn't just standing, it's primed, it's armored, it's angry, it's waiting. Because Murad II held the fire long enough for someone else to aim it. You, walking beside this weary warrior king, saw the embers shift. You saw what it takes to rule when there's no peace, only pauses. You saw the circle of fire drawn and the silence left behind. Now, the fuse is lit. You wake to the sound of drums, echoing across the Black Sea coast. The sun is a pale disk over the waves. Your horse shifts beneath you, sensing something coming, something hungry. Welcome to 1444, near the city of Varna, on the eastern edge of what will soon become the front line of a legend soaked in blood, steel, and superstition. Today, Murad II rides back into history, dragged from retirement to face a new crusade. And beneath the political maneuvering and papal proclamations, there's something darker in the air. The Ottomans don't just face Christian kings. They face the shadows that crawl behind them. The myths, the monsters, the vampires. Yes, vampires. Mainstream fact. The Battle of Varna on November 10th, 1444, was the climax of a major crusade led by King Władysław III of Poland and Hungary, supported by John Hunyadi, the military genius of Transylvania. It was meant to drive the Ottomans from Europe once and for all. Backed by the Pope, the Venetians, and a coalition of Balkan powers. It was a bold, calculated gamble. Murad II had abdicated to his son, the 12-year-old Mehmed II. Everyone assumed the empire would wobble under a boy, but Mehmed, in a move that would foreshadow his future greatness, sent a message to his father. "Come back, father. This throne is yours," Murad answered. And now, under the fluttering banners of Christendom and the roaring cries of the Gazi warriors, the fields outside Varna become a maelstrom of blood and betrayal. Quirky detail. In the Balkans, the word vampire was not a joke. In the weeks leading up to the crusade, whispers spread through the ranks, both Christian and Ottoman, of restless dead, of bodies that did not rot, of soldiers who saw pale men drinking blood by moonlight. Some claimed the corpses of fallen warriors from earlier skirmishes had been found turned in their graves, with clawed hands and swollen lips. The fear was tangible. Priests carried garlic, monks read rites backwards, and janissaries left amulets under their tents. Even King Władysław, a deeply religious youth, was said to have fasted obsessively, convinced the land was cursed and that only purity could save him. The crusade wasn't just about politics, it was spiritual warfare. And the enemy wasn't just Ottoman. It was the creeping belief that in this fog-soaked frontier of East and West, hell had already opened, and some of the soldiers had climbed back out. You ride past campfires and hear them talk. One Hungarian claims he saw Murad's shadow split in two, one riding into battle, one staying behind. A Serbian scout swears he killed a man who had no reflection. A Turkish sipahi carves a wooden stake, muttering old Anatolian prayers. No one said since pagan days. It sounds absurd until you remember where you are. This is Varna, the edge of empires, where history and folklore refuse to be separated. And then the morning breaks. Murad arranges his troops masterfully. His core forces are janissaries, sipahis, and elite cavalry. On either wing, light skirmishers and archers form bait lines, waiting to lure the crusaders in. Hunyadi strikes first, textbook flanking, smashing into Ottoman lines. For a moment, the Christian cross begins to rise on the wind, but then Władysław makes the mistake. The young king, flush with zeal and untested courage, charges directly at Murad's position, aiming for glory. His bodyguard is small. His plan is foolish. He tries to capture or kill Murad in a single thrust. Instead, he rides into the teeth of the janissaries, Murad watches calmly as Władysław's horse is gutted, and the boy king is dragged down and decapitated, his head mounted on a spear. The Crusader army collapses. The victory is total. But what's remembered? Not Murad's tactics, not the clever retreat feints, not the discipline of the Janissaries, or the role of the Ottoman cannons. What people remember is this: Władysław's body was never found. Some say he still rides a white horse beneath him in the forests of Bulgaria. Others say he became a revenant, unable to rest, because his oath to defeat the infidel was unfulfilled. In time, his legend merges with the vampire myth, a dead king who walks at night, who seeks redemption or blood, depending on who tells the story. And in this part of the world, stories don't die, they just feed. The scholars debate. Did the Crusade of Varna die because of one boy's ambition? Or because the idea of crusading itself was already dead? Historians argue over this point fiercely. Some say the Treaty of Szeged, which had promised peace between the Hungarians and Ottomans just months before the Crusade, was already shaky. Pope Eugene IV had pressured Christian kings to violate it, promising spiritual reward and eternal glory. But the appetite for crusade in Western Europe was dwindling. France and England were still tangled in the 100 Years' War. The Holy Roman Empire was too fractured to act. Spain was still finishing its own Reconquista. Varna may have been less about holy purpose and more about local ambition, the last gasp of Eastern kings playing with fire, hoping for miracles. Murad, a man who had wanted peace, crushed it utterly. Some historians see that as tragic, others as inevitable. Back in Edirne, after the battle, you watch Murad walk silently down a colonnade. No triumph, no smile. He doesn't hang Władysław's head in a palace. He buries it. He orders prayers for the dead. And then he goes back to Manisa, back to his poetry, his gardens, his melancholy. And behind him, stories coil. In Hungarian taverns, men speak of the Pale Rider. In Ottoman camps, whispers tell of cursed kings and undead swordsmen. And in the forests of Wallachia, a new prince begins to rise. One who knows how to weaponize fear. You haven't seen the last vampire, not by a long shot. You felt it there, in the cold air of Varna. The line between flesh and legend. The place where blood becomes myth. You didn't just witness a battle. You saw a funeral for chivalry and a birthplace of monsters. And now, the empire turns its gaze south, because beyond the rivers and woods, beyond the mountains and mist, one city still stands like a beacon of defiance. Constantinople. You sit beside the Bosphorus, a salt wind in your face, staring at a silhouette on the horizon. A city strung between two continents. A city with walls older than your empire. A city that refuses to fall. Constantinople. The very name stings like incense in the nose. Glorious, haunted, unbroken. And for one young Ottoman sultan, just 19 years old, it is everything. This is 1451, and Mehmed II, no longer a child, but not yet a conqueror, has returned to the throne. This time, he won't let it go. Mainstream fact: when Mehmed II reclaimed the sultanate after his father Murad's death, many in the Ottoman court dismissed him. The boy sultan, they whispered. A scholar, a dreamer. His first reign, at just 12, had been a puppet show. Surely, he couldn't handle real rule. But they underestimated one thing. Mehmed had been watching and waiting. His eyes were set on Constantinople, the Byzantine capital. Long, the last holdout of the once mighty Eastern Roman Empire. Despite being surrounded by Ottoman territory, the city had survived through treaties, bribes, and divine arrogance. Mehmed saw that as an insult and a challenge. He began preparing almost immediately, not just with soldiers or ships, but with the future's most powerful weapon, big guns, as in really big guns. Quirky detail: one of the most pivotal figures in Mehmed's plan was a Hungarian engineer named Orban, a master cannon maker who had originally offered his services to the Byzantines. They couldn't afford him. Mehmed could. With glee, Orban went to Edirne and started forging the stuff of nightmares. A 27-foot-long bombard that could hurl a stone ball weighing over 200 pounds more than a mile. It was so massive, it required 60 oxen, hundreds of men, and weeks to transport. It shook the earth when fired. Villagers miles away said it cracked open the sky. You can't help but think, this is what it looks like when medieval warfare ends. This is how walls die. But Mehmed wasn't just about firepower. The teenage sultan played the long game. Diplomatically, he kept European powers guessing. He renewed treaties with Venice and Hungary, sent polite letters to the Pope, smiled and nodded, and lied through his teeth. Meanwhile, he had the fortress of Rumeli Hisara, built on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from the older Anadolu Hisara. It was a chokehold, controlling naval access to the city. The Byzantines watched it rise helplessly. By the time they realized what it meant, it was too late. Mehmed's grip on the city had already begun. You're in the palace now. Mehmed walks the gardens of Topkapı, barely built, surrounded by tutors and mathematicians, architects and cartographers. He is fluent in Greek, Arabic, Persian, Latin, and Turkish. He discusses Plato, quotes the Quran, and sketches siege plans while sipping sherbet. He is a bookworm with a warlord's ambition. And across the strait, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine Wentind Palaiologos scrambles to rally support. He sends letters to Catholic kings, begs for ships from Genoa and Venice, pleads for mercenaries. The West shrugs. Most think Constantinople is already lost. Just a matter of when. Mehmed waits. The boy becomes steel. He reorganizes the Janissaries, doubles the navy, and stores grain and gunpowder. like a dragon hoarding treasure. He listens to astrologers, reads old Roman histories, and sharpens his plans like a dagger behind his back. He knows that Constantinople is not just a city, it's a symbol of Rome, of Christianity, of divine legitimacy. And if he can take it, he becomes something else, not just a sultan, but a Caesar, a second Alexander, a shadow god in boots and velvet. The scholars debate. Did Mehmed truly understand the historical weight of Constantinople? Or was he simply a ruthless pragmatist chasing prestige? This remains a hot scholarly question. Some argue that Mehmed's obsession with the city was romantic, that he saw himself as the heir to Rome, not just the prophet, that he wanted to fuse East and West under one crown, a universal empire with himself as its golden axis. Others say this is a post-conquest myth, layered over realpolitik, that Constantinople was strategically critical, a Christian fortress interrupting Ottoman trade, diplomacy, and geography, that Mehmed would have razed it without blinking if it hadn't been so useful. But look at how he prepared, how he learned Byzantine Greek to read their records, how he redesigned mosques with domes inspired by Hagia Sophia, how he adopted Caesarean titles after the city fell. One historian quips, Mehmed didn't just conquer Constantinople, he inhaled it. And he's not wrong. By early 1453, the trap is nearly set. The Ottoman fleet is ready. The siege weapons have been tested. All but a few foreign envoys have left. Mehmed, just past his teens, takes a last quiet ride along the hilltops near Eyüp. He stares at the walls, those massive Theodosian walls, triple layered, 15 meters high, unbreached in 1,000 years. He doesn't blink. He whispers something in Turkish that the Janissaries still quote today. Ya ben İstanbul'u alırım, ya İstanbul beni. Either I take Constantinople, or it takes me. Night falls. The muezzin calls echo over the strait. The moon gleams off cannon barrels. The ships sway at anchor, ready to sail. The Janissaries polish their blades with olive oil and ash. Inside the city, churches begin continuous vigils. Icons are dusted, walls are anointed. A final mass is held, mixing Latin and Greek. A desperate unity under siege. Mehmed, in his pavilion, reads from the Quran, then from Caesar. Then he sleeps for an hour, dreaming of red banners over gold domes. And when he wakes, the gates will groan, the world will change, and history will catch its breath. You wake before dawn, the air thick with sulfur and prophecy. To your right, the golden horn gleams like spilled oil. To your left, the cannons rumble like distant gods, clearing their throats. And straight ahead, blocking out the morning star, is the black shape of Constantinople, still wrapped in its Theodosian walls. Those legendary ramparts no army has ever breached. But this isn't just any siege. This is Mehmed Dasun's masterpiece. And you're standing in the orchestra pit as the overture begins. Mainstream fact. In April 1453, Sultan Mehmed VI launched the full siege of Constantinople. His forces numbered between 80,000 to 100,000 men, including elite janissaries, Anatolian cavalry, siege engineers, and naval crews. The city he faced, a ghost of its former self. Byzantine Emperor Constantine III commanded maybe 7,000 soldiers, including mercenaries, Venetian, and Genoese sailors, and a handful of volunteers. The population had shrunk to barely 50,000 souls, a fraction of its imperial glory. But Constantinople still had its teeth. A triple wall system, a deep moat, a massive chain across the Golden Horn to block enemy ships, and most importantly, an aura of divine protection. Because who could take the city of Constantine? Mehmed had an answer: cannons. And not just any cannons. He brought the Shahi, the monster built by Orban the Hungarian, cast in bronze, 27 feet long, and capable of hurling stone balls the size of bathtubs. It fired only 7 times a day. It had to cool between shots, but each blast shook the earth and fractured dreams. Every sunrise, the air split with sound. Every night, the Janissaries crept closer. Quirky detail. The Byzantine chain across the Golden Horn was a marvel of medieval engineering. Forged links, thick as ties, stretching from the Tower of Galata across the water to block the Ottoman fleet. And it worked for a while. But Mehmed? He thought sideways. Literally. He had 70 ships rolled overland, on greased logs, past hills and vineyards, from the Bosphorus into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain entirely. Eyewitnesses in the city screamed, "The Muslims have made the sea climb the hills." When the Byzantines awoke to see Turkish galleys floating inside their supposedly secure harbor, morale collapsed like wet plaster. Even the angels, it seemed, were on lunch break. The siege stretched on for 7 grinding weeks. Tunnels were dug beneath the walls, and counter-tunnels exploded in fury. Night assaults came like waves, with drums pounding like war horses. A Genoese commander, Giovanni Giustiniani, led the defense with grit and chainmail. He was wounded badly late in the siege, a turning point, as his withdrawal shattered morale. Inside the city, citizens wept in Hagia Sophia, priests singing liturgy alongside desperate mothers. Icons wept tears of blood, or so they claimed, and many waited for an angelic army from the west that never arrived. Outside, Mehmed prepared the final blow. He offered surrender. Constantine refused, and so came May 29th, 1453. The sky over Constantinople was dark by midnight. The stars, witnesses to empires and betrayals, seemed to hold their breath. Then came the signal flare, a green light arcing over the Ottoman lines. Drums thundered, horns howled, and the final assault began. The Janissaries surged forward. The first wave, the expendables, were Anatolian irregulars. They hurled themselves into the walls, drawing arrow fire and exhausting defenders. Then came the second wave, pushing ladders, and dragging corpses aside. And then, with the city groaning and cracks forming at the edges, came the Janissaries, elite, disciplined, terrifying. They moved like ink spilled over a map. At the Kirkaporta gate, a small postern gate was found open or breached. Historians still argue which. Through it poured Ottoman fighters, scaling and pouring over the walls like black rain. Constantine the Fifth, refusing to flee, stripped his imperial garments, drew his sword, and disappeared into the fray. He was never seen again. By morning, the city was Ottoman. The cross of Hagia Sophia fell. The crescent rose, and Constantinople, Nova Roma, city of emperors, refuge of Christendom, was now Istanbul. The scholars debate: was the fall of Constantinople inevitable, or did the West let it happen? This is the dagger question. One camp argues that the city was doomed, surrounded, outnumbered, underfunded, and far past its prime. Even if Latin aid had come, they say, it would have been too little, too late. Constantinople was living on nostalgia and borrowed time, but others insist the West let it fall. The Pope's pleas went ignored. France and England were distracted. The Venetians and Genoese squabbled for trade privileges instead of uniting. And when it mattered most, no crusade came. For Orthodox Byzantines, it was the bitter culmination of 1204, when crusaders sacked their city. For Latin Christians, it was the price of disunity. And for the Ottomans, it was destiny. You walk now through the broken gates. Smoke curls in the alleys. Silk and ash flutter from windows. A donkey brays, oblivious to conquest. But at the center, Hagia Sophia, stands Sultan Mehmed. He enters the basilica, dust and icon fragments crunching under his boots. His eyes scan the golden mosaics, the dome soaring like a second heaven. He kneels. He recites the Shahada, and the church becomes a mosque. No one speaks, not even the ghosts. Later that day, Mehmed orders the looting stopped. He declares the city his capital. He walks the ruins and whispers, "Now I am Caesar." And maybe, for a moment, he is. The crescent moon rises. The cannons fall silent. And history pivots on a single hinge. You walk the shattered avenues of Constantinople. No, Istanbul now. With the dust of empire still in your hair, the scent of ash mingles with incense, and somewhere beneath it all, the salty breath of the Bosphorus carries whispers from 1,000 years of emperors. But one voice is louder than the rest, Mehmed's. Or perhaps we should now say, Mehmed, the conqueror. This is not the boy who rode from Edirne with dreams stitched in silk. This is a man reborn, crowned not just as Sultan of the Turks, but as Kaisari Rum, Caesar of Rome. Mainstream fact. After conquering Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed II styled himself as successor to the Roman emperors, not in jest, but in law, language, and ideology. He adopted the title Caesar of the Roman Empire, Kaiser-i Rum, and sought legitimacy as ruler of both Muslims and Christians, East and West. To the Ottomans, this wasn't cultural cosplay. This was imperial logic. Constantinople was still seen as the heart of the Roman world. Mehmed restored its name to Constantiniye in official documents. He maintained the Byzantine imperial bureaucracy, just translated into Turkish and Persian. He wanted continuity, not collapse. He wanted the world to believe. The Roman Empire hadn't fallen. It had changed hands. You pass former Byzantine nobles, now speaking Turkish. Greek scribes resworn into office. Mosques rising where churches once rang bells. And everywhere, builders, stone, mortar, and vision swirl together as Mehmed begins the reconstruction of a shattered city. It had been dying. Now, it would live again. Quirky detail. Mehmed relocated thousands of families, Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Jewish, into the city to repopulate it. This was no mere migration. It was forced resettlement, sometimes by decree. A ghost city cannot rule an empire. So Mehmed made a melting pot with mortar and mandate. Even more unexpected, he granted privileges to Italian merchants, especially Genoese and Venetians, offering trade deals and freedom of religion if they acknowledged his rule. And he re-established the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate, handpicking Gennadios Scholarios as patriarch after personally interviewing him. Imagine that. The man who had just toppled Christian Constantinople sat down with its top theologians, asked questions about God and governance, and then gave them a cathedral. The message was clear. I am not a destroyer. I am a ruler. From his new palace, Topkapi, rising on the old Acropolis, Mehmed issued laws, summoned architects, and dreamed bigger. You see it in the rebuilt aqueducts. You hear it in the coinage, stamped with his new titles. You feel it in the streets. He's carving through ancient rubble. He doesn't just rule Istanbul. He rules its memory. The scholars debate. Was Mehmed's claim to Roman succession legitimate, or was it imperial propaganda? Some scholars argue that Mehmed's title of Caesar of Rome was a bold fiction, useful for diplomacy and internal authority, but never truly accepted by Western Europe. The Pope certainly never recognized it. Neither did the Holy Roman Emperor, who believed he was the true heir to Rome. To Western eyes, Mehmed was a conquering Muslim ruler, wearing a Christian crown for effect. But other historians say, wait, Mehmed did everything expected of a Roman emperor. He ruled from Constantinople. He re-established Roman law under a new system. He governed Christians, pagans, Muslims, and Jews. He built monuments in the Roman style. He even adopted the double-headed eagle, a Byzantine symbol, as part of his imperial iconography. By Eastern Orthodox standards, with no Byzantine heir left and the capital in his hands, who else could claim the title? In that light, Mehmed wasn't stealing the Roman Empire. He was continuing it, just in a different tongue. And now, you stand beside him on a marble balcony, watching the city breathe beneath new banners. A muezzin calls from a minaret, built where once a dome rang with Orthodox hymns. Below, a Greek merchant counts Ottoman coins, stamped with Arabic script, and a Jewish scholar, in exile, whispers prayers in a language no longer welcome in Castile. This is Mehmed's Rome now. Not Latin, not Greek. Something entirely new. But he's not finished. As he walks the palace halls, Mehmed keeps a copy of Alexander the Great's biography by his bedside. He reads Plutarch. He debates Aristotle with court scholars. He sends for Italian artists and philosophers to paint, sculpt, and flatter. And more than anything, he dreams of more. This is not the end of conquest. This is the beginning of legitimacy. An empire must stand not only on blood and stone, but on meaning. As night settles over Istanbul and the sea breeze lifts the scent of new lime mortar, Mehmed whispers to his advisors, "Rome fell, I restored it, and I will make it eternal." The torch has passed. The dream of empire burns on. Now, beneath a crescent moon, you wake in a bed, not quite Turkish, not quite Roman, somewhere in between, like the empire itself. Outside, the city hums. Istanbul, reborn from Constantinople's ashes, is no longer a ruin. It's a blueprint, a launch pad, a throne upon the edge of two worlds. And Mehmed So, your sultan, your Caesar, isn't content to sit still. Rome is his, yes, but his eyes drift westward to lands not yet humbled, to Hungary, Italy, the Adriatic, and beyond. The dream has changed shape. It now demands Europe. Mainstream fact. After conquering Constantinople in 1453, Mehmed the Conqueror didn't pause for a victory lap. He spent the rest of his life campaigning in Europe, expanding Ottoman control into the Balkans, the Black Sea, and even Italy. Serbia fell 1459. Morea, southern Greece, followed 1460. Trebizond, the last remnant of Byzantium, surrendered in 1461. Wallachia, Albania, Bosnia, and parts of Hungary became bloody chess pieces in an Ottoman endgame. Even the Italian peninsula wasn't safe. In 1480, Mehmed launched an invasion of Otranto in southern Italy, setting foot in Europe proper. He wasn't just expanding territory, he was pressing the claim: if Rome belongs to him, then all that Rome once held must return to its new emperor. You ride with the army through narrow Balkan passes. Caravans drag cannons behind them like iron skeletons. Albanian rebels melt into hills. Christian knights clutch relics and rally behind foreign kings. Ottoman flags flap beside Orthodox crosses and merchant guild banners. It's a patchwork of loyalty and fear. But it all points in one direction. Europe is next. Quirky. Detail. Mehmed didn't just send soldiers into Europe. He sent artists. He invited the Venetian painter, Gentile Bellini, to Istanbul in 1479, commissioning portraits, cityscapes, and even Italian-style medals that bore Mehmed's likeness. A sultan shown in a Renaissance frame, half in shadow, gazing through the veil of west and east. The medal read, Magnus Dominus, et Princeps, Mehmed, by the will of God, ruler of the world. Imagine that. A Muslim sultan having a Renaissance-style commemorative coin struck in his image by a Christian artist. In Latin, it wasn't just vanity, it was message control. To Europe, he was saying, I speak your language, I wear your art, and I am coming. In his court, Mehmed debated Christian scholars, corresponded with Italian humanists, and filled his libraries with Greek, Persian, and Latin works. In his army, Janissaries marched with new firearms. Greek engineers rebuilt bridges, and Bosnian Muslims fought alongside Turkish lords. And in his dreams, Rome. Not the title, the city itself. The scholars debate. Would Mehmed have invaded and taken Rome had he lived longer? The debate has lingered for centuries. Pro-Rome camp. In 1480, Mehmed's army landed in Otranto, southern Italy. The Pope fled Rome. Panic swept the peninsula. The Ottomans held Otranto until Mehmed's sudden death in 1481. His army was preparing to push north, with reports that Rome was a key target. He had the ambition, the resources, and the imperial logic to do it. Skeptics say the Italian campaign was unsustainable, overstretching Mehmed's forces. Ottoman naval power, though growing, couldn't yet sustain a full Italian conquest. His court was still deeply focused on eastern frontiers, Persia, the Black Sea, and Anatolia. Rome may have been a symbolic goal, not a concrete one. Either way, his campaign in Otranto was no feint. He was at the gates. Now, walk with him through Topkapi Palace, its new wings still drying in the summer sun. Court scribes draft edicts for Bosnia. Envoys from Crimea kneel with tribute. Italian artisans sketch a dome Mehmed says should rival Brunelleschi's. And maps? Everywhere. Maps spread across cedar tables, their edges curling like parchment waves. On one, Rome is circled, and next to it, in Mehmed's own hand, a single word is inked: Milkem, mine. But then, spring, 1481. The drums fall silent. The Sultan does not emerge from his tent. Poison, illness, or divine justice. No one agrees. All anyone knows is this: Mehmed the Conqueror is dead. His death triggers a power struggle. Europe breathes a sigh of relief. Otranto is retaken, and the dream of westward conquest stalls, its spear tip dulled before striking the heart. But only for a moment. His son, Bayezid II, inherits more than a throne. He inherits the idea that still burns like a coal in the empire's chest. The West is not enemy alone. It is opportunity, it is claim, it is legacy. As you leave the palace, the breeze carries whispers again. The banners still fly. The crescent still hangs high. And though Mehmed's voice is now a memory, his footsteps echo under marble arches, across Balkan stones, through the painted halls of Italy. Rome was not built in a day, but I nearly reclaimed it in one.